Question 1. Examination of the data shows that a real estate licensee in Maine is preparing a property listing for a single-family home. The licensee wants to make the listing as attractive as possible to potential buyers. Which of the following approaches best balances the goal of creating an appealing listing with the legal and ethical requirements for property descriptions in Maine? Option A. Highlight the property's most desirable features with accurate and verifiable descriptions, such as recently updated kitchen with granite countertops and conveniently located near public transportation, while ensuring no material facts are omitted. Option B. Focus exclusively on the positive attributes of the property, using enthusiastic language, and omit any mention of potential drawbacks or areas that might require future investment. Option C. Employ highly subjective and superlative language, such as breathtaking views and ultimate living experience, to evoke strong emotional responses from potential buyers. Option D. Describe the property using vague terms that suggest desirable qualities without making specific verifiable claims, such as a truly unique residence or an exceptional opportunity. The correct answer is A. Highlight the property's most desirable features with accurate and verifiable descriptions, such as recently updated kitchen with granite countertops and conveniently located near public transportation, while ensuring no material facts are omitted. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate professionals in Maine, balancing the need to attract potential buyers with the legal and ethical obligation to provide accurate and non-misleading property descriptions. Failing to do so can lead to legal repercussions, damage to reputation, and a violation of Maine's real estate licensing laws and regulations, which emphasize honesty and fair dealing. The challenge lies in crafting compelling language that highlights a property's best features without exaggerating or omitting crucial information that a buyer would reasonably expect to know. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves creating a listing that is both appealing and factually accurate, adhering to Maine's real estate advertising regulations. This means highlighting desirable features like recent renovations or desirable neighborhood amenities, but always grounding these descriptions in verifiable facts. For instance, instead of stating stunning ocean views, a more compliant approach would be partial ocean views from the master bedroom, if that is indeed the case. Similarly, mentioning close proximity to downtown amenities is acceptable if the property is within a reasonable walking or short driving distance. This approach ensures compliance with Maine's requirement for truthful advertising and avoids misrepresentation, which is a cornerstone of ethical real estate practice. Incorrect approaches analysis. Using vague and superlative language without factual basis, such as unparalleled luxury or dream home, is problematic because it is subjective and can easily be perceived as puffery that crosses the line into misrepresentation if the property does not objectively meet such high standards. This approach lacks the specificity required by Maine law to ensure buyers are not misled. Describing a property with terms that imply features it does not possess, like spacious backyard, when the yard is actually small, or omitting significant drawbacks such as a known foundation issue or proximity to a noisy highway, constitutes a direct violation of Maine's duty to disclose material facts. Such omissions or fabrications are unethical and illegal. Focusing solely on the most attractive aspects while completely ignoring any potential negative attributes, even if not legally required to be disclosed in the initial listing, depending on the nature of the attribute, can still be considered misleading. A balanced description, even if brief, is more professional and builds trust, whereas an overly one-sided portrayal can lead to buyer disappointment and potential legal challenges. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Maine should adopt a strategy of truthful enthusiasm. This involves identifying the property's genuine strengths and presenting them in an attractive manner, supported by factual details. When crafting descriptions, always ask, is this statement objectively verifiable? And could this statement be misinterpreted by a reasonable buyer to believe something that isn't true? If the answer to either question raises concerns, the description needs to be revised for accuracy and clarity. Furthermore, understanding what constitutes a material fact under Maine law is crucial for knowing what must be disclosed, even if not explicitly requested in the listing description itself. Question 2. Research into the licensing requirements for real estate professionals in Maine reveals that a salesperson's license has inadvertently expired due to an oversight in the renewal process. The salesperson, realizing this error, is still actively engaged in assisting clients with showings and offer negotiations. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the salesperson? Option A. Submit the renewal application and continue operating as usual, as the application signifies an intent to renew and should be sufficient until the new license is issued. Option B. Continue showing properties and negotiating offers, assuming the renewal application which has been submitted will be processed promptly. Option C. Immediately cease all real estate activities that require a license and inform their sponsoring broker of the expired license and the cessation of activities until the license is officially renewed. Option D. Inform the sponsoring broker of the expired license, but continue performing administrative tasks related to real estate transactions, such as preparing comparative market analyses. The correct answer is C. Immediately cease all real estate activities that require a license and inform their sponsoring broker of the expired license and the cessation of activities until the license is officially renewed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine real estate salesperson regarding their licensing status and the implications of their actions while unlicensed. The core issue is maintaining compliance with Maine's licensing laws, specifically concerning the period between license expiration and renewal, and the prohibition of engaging in licensed activities without a valid license. Careful judgment is required to avoid legal repercussions and ethical breaches. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately ceasing all real estate activities that require a license upon realizing the license has expired. This means refraining from showing properties, negotiating offers, or advising clients on real estate transactions until the license is officially renewed. This approach directly aligns with Maine's real estate brokerage law, which mandates that individuals must hold a valid license to perform activities defined as real estate brokerage. Continuing to operate without a license, even if the renewal application is in process, is a violation. Promptly notifying the broker of record about the expired license and the cessation of licensed activities is also crucial for transparency and broker oversight. Incorrect approaches analysis. Continuing to show properties and assist clients with their real estate needs, assuming the renewal application will be processed quickly, is a direct violation of Maine law. This action constitutes practicing real estate brokerage without a license, which can lead to significant penalties, including fines and disciplinary action against the salesperson and their sponsoring broker. It undermines the regulatory framework designed to protect consumers. Submitting a renewal application and then continuing to operate while awaiting approval without explicitly confirming the license is active is also problematic. While the intent might be to expedite the process, the law requires an active license to perform license duties. Relying on the application submission as a de facto license is a misinterpretation of the renewal process and exposes the individual and their broker to risk. Only informing the sponsoring broker of the expired license, but continuing to perform administrative tasks related to real estate transactions, such as preparing comparative market analyses or drafting listing agreements, is still a gray area that could be construed as engaging in licensed activities. The safest and most compliant approach is to cease all activities that require a license until it is confirmed as renewed. Professional reasoning. Professionals in regulated fields must prioritize strict adherence to licensing laws. When a license expires, the immediate and absolute requirement is to cease all activities that necessitate that license. Transparency with the sponsoring broker is paramount. A decision-making framework should involve 1. Identifying the regulatory requirement active license for specific activities. 2. Assessing personal status against the requirement license expired. 3. Determining the immediate compliant action, cease unlicensed activities. 4. Communicating status and actions to relevant parties broker. 5. Following official renewal procedures diligently. Question 3. Which approach would be most compliant with Maine's loan underwriting regulations when a loan officer discovers a significant difference between a borrower's stated monthly income and the income reflected in their provided bank statements during the loan application process? Option A. Request additional documentation from the borrower that explains and reconciles the income discrepancy, such as updated pay stubs or a letter from their employer. Option B. Immediately deny the loan application due to the unresolvable income discrepancy, without further inquiry or opportunity for the borrower to provide clarification. Option C. Accept the borrower's verbal assurance that the discrepancy is due to a temporary situation and proceed with underwriting based on their oral explanation. Option D. Proceed with the loan approval, assuming the borrower's stated income is correct, and the bank statements may contain errors or represent a temporary fluctuation. The correct answer is A. Request additional documentation from the borrower that explains and reconciles the income discrepancy, such as updated pay stubs or a letter from their employer. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in loan underwriting, where a loan officer identifies a potential discrepancy between a borrower's stated income and their documented financial history. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need to facilitate a loan for a client with the absolute requirement to adhere to Maine's lending regulations and ethical standards. Misjudging this situation could lead to regulatory violations, financial losses for the lender, and harm to the borrower. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance and responsible lending practices. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves thoroughly investigating the discrepancy by requesting additional documentation from the borrower that reconciles the difference. This might include updated pay stubs, a letter from the employer explaining the income variation, or tax returns that clarify the income sources. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the underwriting concern in a compliant and ethical manner. Maine's lending laws, like those in most jurisdictions, mandate that lenders underwrite loans based on verified and accurate financial information. Failing to investigate a significant discrepancy would violate the principle of prudent lending and could be seen as facilitating a loan based on incomplete or potentially misleading information, which is a regulatory failure. This method upholds the integrity of the underwriting process and protects both the lender and the borrower from potential future financial distress. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding with the loan approval without further investigation, assuming the borrower's initial statement is accurate despite conflicting documentation, is a significant regulatory failure. This bypasses the core responsibility of underwriting, which is to assess risk based on verified data. It could lead to a loan that the borrower cannot afford, violating responsible lending principles and potentially contravening Maine's consumer protection laws related to predatory lending or unfair practices. Another incorrect approach is to immediately deny the loan based solely on the initial discrepancy, without giving the borrower an opportunity to explain or provide clarifying documentation. While thoroughness is crucial, outright denial without due diligence can be seen as an unfair lending practice and may not align with the spirit of providing access to credit when a borrower is otherwise qualified. It fails to explore reasonable avenues to resolve the underwriting issue. Finally, accepting a verbal explanation from the borrower without seeking any supporting documentation to verify the reconciled income is also professionally unsound and a regulatory risk. Verbal assurances are not sufficient to satisfy underwriting requirements for income verification. This approach leaves the loan vulnerable to the same risks as not investigating at all, as the discrepancy remains unverified by objective evidence, potentially violating Maine's requirements for loan documentation and verification. Professional reasoning. Professionals in loan underwriting should adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach. When a discrepancy arises, the first step is always to identify the nature and potential impact of the discrepancy. The next step is to communicate clearly with the borrower, explaining the concern and requesting specific, verifiable documentation to resolve it. This communication should be professional and provide a reasonable timeframe for the borrower to respond. The underwriter must then meticulously review any submitted documentation to ensure it adequately addresses the initial concern. If the discrepancy is resolved, the loan can proceed. If it cannot be resolved with satisfactory documentation, then a decision to deny the loan, based on the inability to verify essential underwriting criteria, can be made with a clear, documented rationale. This process ensures compliance, fairness, and responsible lending. Question 4. Operational review demonstrates that a real estate licensee in Maine is advising a seller on pricing strategy for their property. The licensee has observed a general increase in interest rates and a slight uptick in housing inventory in the local market over the past quarter. Considering these economic factors, which of the following represents the most appropriate and compliant approach for the licensee? Option A. Present the seller with a detailed analysis of current interest rate trends and inventory levels, explaining how these factors have historically influenced property values in similar Maine markets, and discuss the potential impact on buyer demand and pricing. Option B. Advise the seller that a significant market downturn is imminent due to rising interest rates, and recommend pricing the property aggressively low to ensure a quick sale before values plummet. Option C. Inform the seller that current economic indicators are irrelevant to property pricing, and that the property's value is solely determined by its intrinsic features and the seller's desired price. Option D. Emphasize to the seller that rising interest rates are a minor concern and that the market will continue to experience strong appreciation, urging them to price the property at the highest possible point to capitalize on perceived future growth. The correct answer is A. Present the seller with a detailed analysis of current interest rate trends and inventory levels, explaining how these factors have historically influenced property values in similar Maine markets, and discuss the potential impact on buyer demand and pricing. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate licensee must navigate the complexities of local economic indicators and their potential impact on property values without engaging in speculative or misleading practices. The Maine real estate license laws and regulations require licensees to act with honesty, integrity, and competence, and to avoid misrepresentation or concealment of material facts. A licensee's advice must be grounded in factual analysis and professional judgment, not in personal predictions or unsubstantiated claims about future market shifts. The best approach involves a thorough analysis of current and historical economic data relevant to the specific Maine market. This includes examining local employment trends, interest rate fluctuations, inventory levels, and recent sales comparables. By presenting this objective data and explaining its potential implications for property values, the licensee empowers the client to make an informed decision. This aligns with the regulatory requirement to provide competent service and to avoid making representations that are not supported by facts. Ethical practice dictates that licensees should educate their clients about market dynamics rather than attempting to predict or influence future market movements. An approach that focuses solely on predicting a significant market downturn based on anecdotal evidence or personal opinion is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes speculation and could lead to misrepresentation if the prediction proves inaccurate, potentially violating Maine's laws against deceptive practices. Similarly, an approach that dismisses all economic factors as irrelevant ignores the licensee's duty to provide informed advice and to understand the market in which they operate. This demonstrates a lack of competence and a failure to uphold professional standards. Finally, an approach that emphasizes only the potential for market appreciation without acknowledging potential risks or downturns is also problematic. This selective presentation of information can be considered misleading and fails to provide a balanced perspective, which is crucial for ethical client representation under Maine's regulatory framework. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes objective data analysis, clear communication of potential market influences, both positive and negative, and a commitment to educating clients rather than predicting the future. This involves staying current with economic trends, understanding how these trends typically affect real estate markets, and translating this knowledge into actionable, fact-based advice for clients. Question 5. A seller in Portland, Maine, is insistent that their property be listed at a specific price, which they believe is achievable based on a friend's opinion. You, as the listing agent, have conducted a thorough comparative market analysis, CMA, that suggests a lower price range. The seller asks you to use the income approach, focusing only on potential rental income and ignoring current market conditions to justify their desired higher price. How should you ethically proceed? Option A. Explain to the seller that a comparative market analysis is the most appropriate method for this type of property, and that you will present a value range based on objective market data, while educating them on the limitations of other approaches if used inappropriately. Option B. Suggest using the cost approach and inflate the estimated replacement cost of the property while minimizing depreciation to support the seller's desired higher price. Option C. Agree to use the income approach, focusing solely on projected rental income and ignoring current market conditions to justify the seller's desired higher price, as this is what the seller is requesting. Option D. Advise the seller that you will present both a CMA and an income approach, but will emphasize the income approach's potential for a higher valuation, even if it requires speculative income projections. The correct answer is A. Explain to the seller that comparative market analysis is the most appropriate method for this type of property, and that you will present a value range based on objective market data, while educating them on the limitations of other approaches if used inappropriately. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate licensee is being pressured to manipulate a valuation method to achieve a specific outcome desired by a client, rather than adhering to objective and ethical appraisal principles. This requires careful judgment to uphold professional integrity and comply with Maine's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards. The best approach in this situation is to explain to the client that a comparative market analysis, CMA, is intended to provide an objective estimate of a property's market value based on recent sales of comparable properties. It involves selecting comparable properties that are similar in size, condition, location, and features, and then making adjustments for any significant differences. The goal is to present a range of value supported by market data, not to engineer a specific price. Maine law and professional ethics mandate that licensees provide honest and fair representations of property value and avoid misrepresentation or deceptive practices. A CMA, when performed correctly, aligns with these principles by relying on verifiable market data, using the income approach to justify a higher price when the property is not primarily an investment property, or when the income generated is not the primary driver of its market value, is an ethical failure. The income approach is designed for income-producing properties and relies on projections of future income and expenses, which can be speculative and misleading if misapplied. Manipulating these projections to inflate value would be a deceptive practice. Similarly, misapplying the cost approach by overestimating replacement costs or underestimating depreciation to artificially inflate the value is also an ethical breach. The cost approach is most relevant for newer construction or unique properties where comparable sales are scarce, and its accuracy depends on realistic cost estimates and depreciation calculations. To use it as a tool to force a specific price, rather than as a legitimate valuation method, violates the duty of honesty and fair dealing owed to all parties. Professionals should approach valuation requests by first understanding the purpose of the valuation and the client's objectives. They must then select the most appropriate valuation method, based on the property type and available data. If a client expresses a desire for a specific outcome that conflicts with objective valuation principles, the licensee must educate the client about the limitations of valuation methods and the ethical obligations of the licensee. The licensee should explain that their professional duty is to provide an accurate and unbiased estimate of value, and that attempting to manipulate a valuation method to achieve a predetermined price is unethical and potentially illegal. If the client insists on an outcome that requires unethical practices, the licensee should consider withdrawing from the transaction. Question 6. A prospective buyer in Portland, Maine, is working with a licensed real estate salesperson and expresses confusion about the various mortgage options available, including conventional, FHA, and VA loans. The buyer asks the salesperson to recommend the best loan for their situation and to explain how interest rates are determined. What is the most appropriate course of action for the salesperson? Option A. Downplay the importance of pre-approval, assuring the buyer that they can secure financing once they find a property they like, and offer to explain the nuances of different mortgage-backed securities. Option B. Advise the buyer that FHA loans are generally the easiest to qualify for, and then offer to help them fill out the initial loan application with a lender the salesperson knows. Option C. Explain the general characteristics and eligibility requirements of common loan types, and strongly advise the buyer to consult with a licensed mortgage broker or lender to discuss their specific financial situation and obtain pre-approval. Option D. Recommend a specific mortgage lender that the salesperson has worked with previously and has found to be reliable, and provide a detailed explanation of how interest rates are calculated based on market conditions. The correct answer is C. Explain the general characteristics and eligibility requirements of common loan types, and strongly advise the buyer to consult with a licensed mortgage broker or lender to discuss their specific financial situation and obtain pre-approval. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Maine to navigate the complexities of financing options for a buyer, while adhering strictly to Maine's real estate licensing laws and ethical obligations. The salesperson must ensure they are providing accurate, non-misleading information and acting in the buyer's best interest without overstepping their professional boundaries or engaging in the unauthorized practice of law or financial advice. Careful judgment is required to balance assisting the buyer with understanding their options and avoiding actions that could lead to legal or ethical repercussions. The best approach involves the salesperson acting as a facilitator and educator, guiding the buyer towards qualified professionals. This means clearly explaining the general types of financing available, such as conventional mortgages, FHA loans, VA loans, and USDA loans, and outlining the typical characteristics and eligibility requirements of each. Crucially, the salesperson must then strongly advise the buyer to consult with a licensed mortgage broker or lender to discuss their specific financial situation, creditworthiness, and to obtain pre-approval. This approach is correct because it aligns with Maine's regulatory framework, which permits licensees to provide general information about financing, but prohibits them from offering specific financial advice or acting as a mortgage broker without the appropriate licensing. It upholds the ethical duty to act in the client's best interest by ensuring they receive expert advice tailored to their individual circumstances from licensed professionals. An incorrect approach would be to recommend a specific lender or loan product based on the salesperson's personal opinion or perceived benefits. This is a regulatory failure because it constitutes providing financial advice, which is outside the scope of a real estate salesperson's license in Maine, and could be construed as the unauthorized practice of financial advising. It also creates a conflict of interest if the salesperson receives any referral fees or benefits from the recommended lender, violating ethical duties of loyalty and disclosure. Another incorrect approach would be to explain the intricacies of loan underwriting, interest rate calculations, or closing cost estimations in detail. While seemingly helpful, this ventures into the territory of financial and legal advice, which requires specialized licensing and expertise. Maine law is clear that real estate licensees are not qualified to provide such detailed financial guidance, and doing so could mislead the buyer or create liability for the salesperson and their brokerage. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to downplay the importance of pre-approval or to suggest that the buyer can proceed with the purchase without securing financing first. This is an ethical failure and a potential regulatory violation, as it does not act in the buyer's best interest. It exposes the buyer to significant financial risk, potentially leading to the loss of earnest money and damaging their credit, and demonstrates a lack of professional diligence in guiding the client through a critical stage of the transaction. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and referral to qualified experts. This involves understanding the boundaries of their license, identifying situations where specialized advice is needed, and proactively connecting clients with appropriate professionals such as mortgage brokers, lenders, attorneys, and inspectors. Transparency about their role and limitations is paramount, ensuring clients are empowered to make informed decisions with the guidance of licensed professionals. Question 7. The control framework reveals that a first-time homebuyer in Portland, Maine, expresses concern about their ability to manage rising housing costs over the next decade, but is also attracted to the lowest possible initial monthly payment. They have a stable, albeit moderate, income and anticipate no significant changes in their financial situation in the foreseeable future. Which mortgage product recommendation best aligns with their stated concerns and financial profile, while adhering to Maine's real estate licensing laws and ethical obligations? Option A. An adjustable rate mortgage with a low introductory rate, which could offer a lower initial payment but carries the risk of future payment increases. Option B. An interest-only mortgage, allowing the borrower to pay only the interest for an initial period, significantly reducing initial payments but deferring principal repayment. Option C. A balloon mortgage, which features lower initial payments but requires a large lump sum payment at the end of the loan term. Option D. A fixed-rate mortgage, offering predictable principal and interest payments for the entire loan term, providing long-term payment stability. The correct answer is D. A fixed-rate mortgage, offering predictable principal and interest payments for the entire loan term, providing long-term payment stability. Explanation. The control framework reveals that navigating client financial situations and recommending appropriate mortgage products requires a deep understanding of both client needs and the nuances of different loan types. This scenario is professionally challenging because a salesperson must balance the client's immediate desire for affordability with the long-term implications of their financial commitment, all while adhering to Maine's licensing regulations and ethical standards. Misjudging a client's risk tolerance or financial stability can lead to significant hardship for the borrower and potential regulatory action against the licensee. The best approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial profile and future plans to determine the most suitable mortgage product. This includes understanding their income stability, debt-to-income ratio, expected duration of homeownership, and tolerance for payment fluctuations. For a client with a stable income and long-term homeownership plans, a fixed-rate mortgage offers predictable payments, mitigating the risk of future interest rate increases. This aligns with the Maine real estate license laws and regulations, which emphasize acting in the client's best interest and providing accurate, understandable information about loan products. Recommending a product that aligns with the client's financial capacity and long-term goals is paramount. An approach that prioritizes a lower initial monthly payment without fully exploring the client's long-term financial stability or future income prospects is professionally unsound. Recommending an adjustable rate mortgage solely based on a lower introductory rate, without a comprehensive discussion of the potential for payment increases and the client's ability to absorb them, fails to meet the fiduciary duty owed to the client and could violate Maine's regulations regarding fair dealing and disclosure. Similarly, suggesting an interest-only mortgage without a clear understanding of the client's exit strategy or their ability to manage the principal repayment later on is highly risky and likely to lead to financial distress, contravening the ethical obligation to ensure clients can manage their mortgage obligations. Focusing solely on closing the deal without a holistic client assessment demonstrates a failure to uphold professional standards and regulatory requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with active listening and comprehensive fact-finding. This involves asking probing questions about the client's financial history, current situation, and future aspirations. Next, they should educate the client on the characteristics, risks, and benefits of each relevant mortgage type, tailoring the explanation to the client's level of understanding. Finally, they should guide the client towards a decision that demonstrably aligns with their stated financial goals and risk tolerance, ensuring full transparency and informed consent. Question 8. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a first-time homebuyer in Maine is seeking to purchase a property with minimal upfront costs. They have expressed interest in government-backed loan programs. As a licensed real estate salesperson, what is the most appropriate course of action to ethically and effectively assist this client? Option A. Inform the client that government-backed loans are complex and that they should independently research all options and contact lenders themselves, as the salesperson cannot provide guidance on specific loan types. Option B. Advise the client that USDA loans are the only viable option for low upfront costs in rural Maine, and proceed to focus solely on properties that meet USDA eligibility, without exploring other government-backed or conventional financing. Option C. Discuss the general benefits and eligibility nuances of FHA, VA, and USDA loans, emphasizing how each program might address their low upfront cost goal, and then recommend they consult with a qualified mortgage lender to determine their specific eligibility and loan options. Option D. Strongly recommend the FHA loan program, highlighting its generally lower down payment requirements, and assure the client that it is the most suitable option for buyers with limited initial funds, without delving into other program specifics or lender consultations. The correct answer is C. Discuss the general benefits and eligibility nuances of FHA, VA, and USDA loans, emphasizing how each program might address their low upfront cost goal, and then recommend they consult with a qualified mortgage lender to determine their specific eligibility and loan options. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Maine to balance the client's immediate financial concerns with the long-term implications and specific requirements of government-backed loan programs. A salesperson must act in the client's best interest, which includes providing accurate information and guiding them towards suitable financing options without misrepresenting program benefits or eligibility. The salesperson's duty is to facilitate an informed decision, not to steer the client towards a loan that may not be the most appropriate or sustainable for their situation. The best approach involves thoroughly understanding the client's financial profile and then clearly explaining the distinct characteristics, benefits, and eligibility criteria of FHA, VA, and USDA loans as they apply in Maine. This includes detailing the down payment requirements, potential for lower credit score acceptance, specific property eligibility for USDA loans, and the entitlement process for VA loans. The salesperson should then empower the client to discuss these options with a qualified mortgage lender who can assess their specific eligibility and provide concrete loan terms. This aligns with Maine's real estate licensing laws, which mandate honesty, fair dealing, and a duty to advise clients on matters within the salesperson's expertise, while also recognizing the need for specialized financial advice from lenders. An incorrect approach would be to strongly advocate for a specific government-backed loan program based solely on the client's stated desire for a low down payment, without a comprehensive understanding of the client's overall financial situation or the specific property's eligibility. This could lead to a client pursuing a loan that ultimately doesn't meet their needs or is not feasible, potentially violating the duty of care and fair dealing. Another incorrect approach is to downplay the eligibility requirements or potential limitations of any government-backed loan program to secure a sale. For instance, implying that an FHA loan is universally accessible without discussing credit score minimums or property condition requirements would be misleading. Similarly, suggesting that a VA loan is a simple entitlement without explaining the funding fee or the need for a certificate of eligibility misinforms the client. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to advise the client that they must choose a specific type of government-backed loan because it is the only option available for buyers with limited funds. This is factually inaccurate and limits the client's choices, potentially preventing them from exploring other viable financing avenues or even conventional loans if their circumstances allow. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and informed consent. This involves active listening to understand the client's needs, researching and presenting accurate information about relevant financing options, clearly delineating the salesperson's role versus that of a mortgage lender, and always acting with integrity and transparency. Question 9. Market research demonstrates a growing interest in waterfront properties along the coast of Maine. A licensed real estate salesperson is representing a buyer interested in a specific property. During negotiations, the salesperson learns that the seller of that property is also considering making an offer on another property that the salesperson's firm is listing, and for which the salesperson is the designated listing agent. What is the most appropriate action for the salesperson to take? Option A. Proceed with the transaction as planned, assuming the seller will discover the firm's involvement with their potential new property later. Option B. Encourage the seller to make an offer on the other property, as this could lead to a quicker sale of the current property. Option C. Advise the seller to seek independent legal counsel without first disclosing the potential conflict of interest. Option D. Immediately disclose to the seller that the salesperson's firm is representing the seller of the property they are interested in, and that the salesperson is the designated listing agent for a property the seller is considering. The correct answer is D. Immediately disclose to the seller that the salesperson's firm is representing the seller of the property they are interested in, and that the salesperson is the designated listing agent for a property the seller is considering. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the licensee to navigate a potential conflict of interest and uphold their fiduciary duties to their client while also considering the financial implications of a transaction. The licensee must act with integrity and transparency, ensuring that their advice is solely in the best interest of their client, not influenced by personal gain or the desire to close a deal quickly. Adherence to Maine's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly and promptly disclosing the potential dual agency situation to the seller. This approach aligns with Maine's real estate brokerage law, which mandates that licensees must disclose any potential conflicts of interest to all parties involved in a transaction. By informing the seller of the buyer's interest and the licensee's representation of that buyer, the seller can make an informed decision about proceeding with the transaction and whether they wish to continue with the licensee's representation. This upholds the fiduciary duty of loyalty and full disclosure owed to the seller. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the transaction without informing the seller about the buyer's interest and the licensee's representation of that buyer. This failure to disclose a material fact and a potential conflict of interest violates Maine's real estate brokerage law, specifically the provisions regarding disclosure and avoiding misrepresentation. It breaches the fiduciary duty of loyalty and full disclosure owed to the seller. Another incorrect approach is to advise the seller to accept the offer without disclosing the licensee's representation of the buyer. This action constitutes a misrepresentation and a breach of fiduciary duty. The licensee is prioritizing the closing of the deal over the seller's right to informed decision-making, potentially leading to a transaction that is not in the seller's best interest. This is a direct violation of ethical conduct and Maine's real estate regulations. A further incorrect approach is to suggest that the seller seek independent legal counsel without first disclosing the dual representation. While seeking legal counsel is often advisable, failing to disclose the conflict of interest upfront is the primary ethical and regulatory failure. The disclosure must precede any advice or recommendation, ensuring the seller understands the context of the situation before seeking further guidance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize transparency and full disclosure when faced with potential conflicts of interest. The decision-making process should begin with identifying any situation that could compromise their ability to act solely in the client's best interest. This involves a thorough understanding of the relevant state laws and ethical codes. When a conflict is identified, the immediate and primary action must be to disclose it to all affected parties, allowing them to make informed decisions. This proactive approach builds trust and maintains professional integrity. Question 10. Process analysis reveals that 3 heirs in Maine have inherited a property as tenants in common, each holding an equal fractional interest. The property has an estimated market value of $600,000. One heir urgently needs their share of the inheritance to cover immediate financial obligations. What is the most appropriate course of action for a real estate professional assisting these heirs? Option A. Advise the heirs to sell the property immediately at the best possible price, even if it means accepting a lower offer to satisfy the urgent needs of one heir. Option B. Suggest that one heir buy out the other 2 at a price determined by the heir needing immediate funds, without an independent valuation. Option C. Facilitate a professional appraisal to determine the property's fair market value, calculate each heir's equitable share based on their fractional interest, and then assist in negotiating a buyout or a sale of the property with the agreement of all co-owners. Option D. Recommend that the heirs pursue a legal partition of the property to divide it into 3 separate parcels, regardless of the property's suitability for such division. The correct answer is C. Facilitate a professional appraisal to determine the property's fair market value, calculate each heir's equitable share based on their fractional interest, and then assist in negotiating a buyout or a sale of the property with the agreement of all co-owners. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in real estate transactions involving inherited property and differing financial needs among co-owners. The professional challenge lies in navigating the legal complexities of co-ownership while addressing the diverse financial objectives of the heirs, requiring a nuanced understanding of Maine's property law and ethical obligations to all parties. The need for a mathematically sound valuation and a clear understanding of ownership structures is paramount to avoid disputes and ensure a fair outcome. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough valuation of the property and a clear understanding of the existing ownership structure, specifically identifying the tenancy in common. Under Maine law, tenants in common each hold an undivided fractional interest in the property, and any sale or partition requires the agreement of all co-owners. A professional appraisal, utilizing methods such as comparable sales analysis and considering any unique property features, provides an objective basis for determining each tenant's equitable share. This approach directly addresses the core of the problem by establishing a fair market value, which is essential for any subsequent division of proceeds or buyout negotiations. The calculation of each heir's share is then a straightforward mathematical division based on their fractional interest. For example, if the property is valued at $500, 000 and the heirs hold equal shares, each heir's share would be calculated as \text heirs share equals \text property value times text fractional interest text heirs share equals $500 times frac 13 equals $166 666 67 This mathematically sound and legally compliant approach ensures transparency and fairness, aligning with the fiduciary duties of a real estate professional to represent all parties' interests ethically and competently. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves prioritizing the immediate financial needs of one heir without a formal valuation or agreement from all parties. This fails to uphold the principles of tenancy in common, where each owner has an equal right to their fractional interest. Proceeding with a sale or buyout based on an informal estimate or the demands of a single heir would violate Maine's property laws and ethical standards, potentially leading to legal challenges and financial repercussions for all involved. Another incorrect approach is to suggest a partition action without first attempting to reach a mutually agreeable solution. While partition is a legal remedy available to tenants in common, it is often a costly and time-consuming process. A professional's role is to facilitate a resolution, not to immediately resort to litigation, especially when a negotiated sale or buyout is feasible. This approach neglects the professional obligation to explore less adversarial and more efficient solutions. A further incorrect approach is to advise the heirs to simply divide the property physically without considering the marketability or practicality of such a division. In Maine, while physical partition is possible, it is often not feasible for residential properties and can significantly diminish the overall value of the asset. This approach ignores the economic realities of real estate and the potential for creating unusable or unsaleable parcels. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach that begins with understanding the legal framework of ownership, tenancy in common in this case. This is followed by objective valuation to establish a fair market price. Next, open communication and negotiation among all co-owners are crucial to explore mutually agreeable solutions, such as a buyout or a sale. If an agreement cannot be reached, then legal counsel should be sought to discuss options like partition. Throughout this process, maintaining transparency, providing accurate information, and acting in the best interests of all parties are paramount ethical and professional obligations. Question 11. The audit findings indicate that a property manager in Maine, responsible for overseeing several rental properties, recently engaged a contractor for significant repair work on one of the managed properties. It has come to light that the property manager has a close personal friendship with the owner of the contracting company. The property manager did not disclose this relationship to the property owner before authorizing the repair contract, nor did they obtain the owner's explicit consent for this arrangement. What is the most appropriate course of action for the property manager in this situation, considering Maine's real estate regulations and ethical obligations? Option A. Cancel the contract with the current contractor and immediately engage a new contractor without informing the original contractor of the reason for cancellation. Option B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship with the contractor to the property owner in writing and seek their written consent to continue with the current contractor or offer to rebid the work. Option C. Inform the property owner that the contractor was chosen based on competitive bidding without mentioning the personal relationship. Option D. Proceed with the repair contract as planned, assuming the owner would trust their judgment given their established working relationship. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship with the contractor to the property owner in writing and seek their written consent to continue with the current contractor or offer to rebid the work. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential conflict of interest and a breach of fiduciary duty in property management, which is a professionally challenging scenario requiring careful judgment. The property manager holds a position of trust, obligated to act in the best interests of the property owner, while also adhering to Maine's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards. The challenge lies in balancing the owner's financial interests with the manager's personal gain or relationships, and ensuring transparency and fairness in all transactions. The best professional approach involves proactively identifying and disclosing any potential conflicts of interest to the property owner in writing, and seeking their informed consent before proceeding with any related transactions. This approach upholds the property manager's fiduciary duty by prioritizing the owner's interests and ensuring transparency. Maine law, specifically through the Maine real estate license laws and rules, mandates that licensees act honestly and in good faith and disclose material facts, which includes potential conflicts of interest. Ethically, this demonstrates integrity and builds trust, essential for long-term professional relationships. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the repair contract without informing the property owner about the personal relationship with the contractor. This failure to disclose a material fact violates the property manager's fiduciary duty and potentially Maine's real estate regulations concerning disclosure and conflicts of interest, creates an appearance of impropriety, and could lead to the owner questioning the fairness of the pricing and the quality of the work, undermining the manager's credibility. Another incorrect approach is to assume the owner would implicitly approve the arrangement due to past dealings. This assumption bypasses the requirement for explicit, informed consent. Maine law requires clear and upfront communication, not implied approval. Relying on past relationships without current disclosure is a risky practice that can lead to misunderstandings and legal repercussions. Finally, attempting to conceal the relationship with the contractor by using a different company name for the invoice is a deceptive practice. This is a direct violation of ethical standards and likely contravenes Maine's regulations regarding honest dealings and accurate record-keeping. Such deception erodes trust and can result in severe disciplinary action from the Maine Real Estate Commission. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, disclosure, and the owner's informed consent in all situations that present a potential conflict of interest. This involves a proactive risk assessment of every transaction, identifying any personal or business relationships that could influence judgment, and communicating these potential conflicts clearly and in writing to the client before any action is taken. Question 12. Governance review demonstrates that a real estate licensee in Maine is working with a seller who has a strong emotional attachment to their property and believes it is worth significantly more than recent comparable sales suggest. The seller insists on listing the property at their desired inflated price, stating, "I know what my home is worth to me, and that's what matters." How should the licensee ethically and professionally proceed? Option A. Agree to list the property at the seller's desired price without question, focusing on marketing the property at that figure and assuring the seller that their emotional valuation is the primary driver for the listing. Option B. Immediately dismiss the seller's valuation and insist on listing the property at a price significantly lower than the seller desires, without thoroughly explaining the market data or understanding the seller's perspective. Option C. Educate the seller on the concept of market value versus intrinsic value, present objective market data, and collaboratively determine a listing price that balances the seller's expectations with market realities, while clearly defining the licensee's role as a facilitator of informed decisions. Option D. Suggest that the licensee has unique strategies or connections that will allow them to achieve the seller's inflated price, implying an ability to influence market outcomes beyond standard real estate practices. The correct answer is C. Educate the seller on the concept of market value versus intrinsic value, present objective market data, and collaboratively determine a listing price that balances the seller's expectations with market realities, while clearly defining the licensee's role as a facilitator of informed decisions. Explanation. Governance review demonstrates that ethical considerations are paramount in real estate transactions, particularly concerning the definition and importance of a property's value. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a licensee must navigate a client's subjective perception of value against objective market realities and legal obligations. The pressure to close a deal can create a conflict between client satisfaction and the licensee's duty to provide accurate, unbiased information. Careful judgment is required to uphold professional integrity and protect both the client and the public interest. The best professional approach involves clearly defining the role of a real estate licensee as an intermediary who facilitates transactions based on objective information and market analysis, rather than personal opinion or emotional attachment to a property. This approach prioritizes educating the client about the difference between intrinsic value, what the owner feels the property is worth, and market value, what a willing buyer would pay and a willing seller would accept in an open market. A licensee must explain that their role is to provide data-driven insights, such as comparable sales, market trends, and professional appraisals, to help the client make an informed decision. This aligns with Maine's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards, which mandate honesty, fair dealing, and the avoidance of misrepresentation. The licensee's duty is to act in the client's best interest by providing accurate information, even if it means managing expectations about a property's perceived worth. An approach that focuses solely on the seller's emotional attachment and personal valuation, agreeing to list the property at a price significantly above market value without providing objective data, is ethically and legally flawed. This fails to uphold the licensee's duty of honest dealing and could lead to misrepresentation by omission, as the client is not being fully informed about the realistic market potential. Such an action violates the principle of providing competent service and could result in the client suffering financial loss due to an overpriced listing and prolonged market exposure. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the seller's concerns about market value and immediately push for a lower price without first attempting to understand their perspective and then presenting objective data. While the licensee may have market knowledge, complete disregard for the client's feelings and a purely directive approach can erode trust and be perceived as unprofessional. This does not foster a collaborative decision-making process and fails to adequately educate the client on the factors influencing market value. Finally, an approach that suggests the licensee will work magic to achieve the seller's desired price, implying they have special influence or undisclosed methods to manipulate the market, is deceptive and unethical. This misrepresents the nature of real estate transactions and the licensee's capabilities, potentially leading to unrealistic expectations and a breach of trust. It also fails to adhere to the principle of providing accurate and truthful information. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with active listening to understand the client's perspective and motivations. This should be followed by a clear explanation of the licensee's role and responsibilities, emphasizing the provision of objective market data and analysis. The licensee should then present this information in a way that educates the client, allowing them to understand the difference between subjective and objective value. Open communication and a collaborative approach to setting realistic expectations are crucial for building trust and ensuring a successful, ethical transaction. Question 13. Governance review demonstrates that a licensed real estate salesperson in Maine, representing a seller, has a close personal friend who expresses interest in purchasing the seller's property. The salesperson has not yet informed the seller of this personal connection to the potential buyer. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the salesperson to take? Option A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship with the potential buyer to the seller and seek the seller's informed consent to continue representing them in the transaction, while reaffirming their commitment to the seller's best interests. Option B. Inform the seller and then attempt to represent both the seller and the friend in the transaction without further specific disclosure or consent regarding the dual representation. Option C. Proceed with showing the property to the friend without informing the seller, hoping to facilitate a quick sale. Option D. Inform the seller of the friend's interest, but immediately withdraw from representing the seller to avoid any appearance of conflict. Correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship with the potential buyer to the seller and seek the seller's informed consent to continue representing them in the transaction, while reaffirming their commitment to the seller's best interests. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate salesperson in Maine to navigate a potential conflict of interest and uphold their fiduciary duties to their client, while also considering the interest of a potential buyer who is a close acquaintance. The salesperson must balance the obligation of loyalty and confidentiality to their seller client with the ethical imperative to act with fairness and honesty towards all parties involved in a transaction, even if they are not their direct client. Careful judgment is required to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. The best professional approach involves immediately disclosing the personal relationship with the potential buyer to the seller client and seeking their informed consent to proceed with the transaction, while also clearly outlining the salesperson's continued commitment to representing the seller's best interests. This approach is correct because it prioritizes transparency and client consent, which are fundamental ethical principles in real estate practice in Maine. Maine law and professional ethics mandate that a licensee must disclose any potential conflicts of interest to their clients. By informing the seller and obtaining their agreement, the salesperson demonstrates adherence to their fiduciary duty of loyalty and avoids any misrepresentation or undisclosed dual agency. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with showing the property to the acquaintance without informing the seller, hoping to secure a sale. This fails to uphold the duty of loyalty to the seller, as the salesperson's personal relationship with the buyer could influence their negotiation strategies or advice given to the seller. It also creates a situation where the salesperson might inadvertently act as an undisclosed dual agent, which is prohibited. Another incorrect approach would be to inform the seller, but then withdraw from representing the seller entirely, leaving them to find new representation or navigate the sale independently. While this avoids a direct conflict, it may not be in the seller's best interest and could be seen as abandoning a client without adequate reason, especially if the seller was willing to proceed with full disclosure. A final incorrect approach would be to inform the seller and then attempt to represent both the seller and the buyer in the transaction without proper disclosure and consent for dual agency, or to prioritize the buyer's interests due to the personal relationship. This would violate the fiduciary duties owed to the seller and potentially violate Maine's real estate licensing laws regarding agency representation and conflicts of interest. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest. This should be followed by a thorough review of their fiduciary duties and ethical obligations under Maine law. The next step is to communicate transparently and promptly with the client, explaining the situation and potential implications. Seeking informed consent from the client for any proposed course of action is paramount. If a conflict cannot be resolved ethically or with client consent, the professional must consider withdrawing from the representation in a manner that minimizes harm to the client. Question 14. Strategic planning requires a real estate licensee in Maine to develop a robust tenant screening process. A landlord has expressed a desire to rent to a tenant who will be a good neighbor and maintain the property well. The licensee is reviewing applications and has received information about several prospective tenants. Which of the following screening approaches best aligns with Maine's fair housing laws and ethical professional conduct? Option A. Evaluating applicants based on subjective impressions of their lifestyle and perceived compatibility with the existing neighborhood. Option B. Inquiring about prospective tenants' family plans and marital status to gauge their potential stability and long-term commitment to the property. Option C. Prioritizing applicants who are personally recommended by acquaintances or who appear to have a higher social standing. Option D. Implementing a standardized screening process that objectively verifies income, employment history, rental history, and credit reports for all applicants, and basing the decision solely on these verifiable criteria. The correct answer is D. Implementing a standardized screening process that objectively verifies income, employment history, rental history, and credit reports for all applicants, and basing the decision solely on these verifiable criteria. Explanation. This scenario presents a common ethical and legal challenge for real estate licensees in Maine, balancing the landlord's desire to find a good tenant with the legal and ethical obligations to avoid discriminatory practices during tenant screening. The challenge lies in the subjective nature of assessing a prospective tenant's suitability while adhering strictly to fair housing laws. A licensee must navigate this by relying on objective, verifiable criteria and avoiding any reliance on protected characteristics. The best approach involves a systematic and objective screening process that focuses solely on criteria directly related to a tenant's ability to fulfill the lease obligations. This includes verifying income, employment stability, rental history, and creditworthiness through consistent application of predefined screening criteria to all applicants. This method ensures compliance with the Maine Fair Housing Act and federal fair housing laws by treating all applicants equally and basing decisions on factors directly predictive of tenancy success, thereby avoiding any appearance or reality of discrimination based on protected classes. An approach that involves asking prospective tenants about their family plans or marital status is ethically and legally flawed. Such inquiries delve into protected characteristics under fair housing laws, such as familial status and potentially sex or religion, and can lead to discriminatory decisions. Basing screening decisions, even partially, on assumptions about future behavior related to these characteristics is a direct violation of fair housing principles. Another problematic approach is to consider subjective impressions of a prospective tenant's lifestyle or perceived fit with the neighborhood. This is highly susceptible to unconscious bias and can easily lead to discrimination based on protected characteristics like race, national origin, or religion. The law requires objective, verifiable criteria, not personal judgments about a tenant's character or social compatibility. Finally, prioritizing applicants based on personal recommendations or perceived social standing, without a standardized, objective screening process, is also unacceptable. This practice opens the door to favoritism and discrimination, as it bypasses the established legal framework for tenant selection and can lead to decisions influenced by factors unrelated to a tenant's ability to pay rent or maintain the property. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves developing a written tenant screening policy that outlines objective criteria, applying this policy consistently to all applicants, and documenting the screening process thoroughly. When in doubt, licensees should consult with legal counsel or their broker to ensure all actions align with fair housing laws and ethical best practices. Question 15. Governance review demonstrates that a real estate licensee in Maine is representing a client who wishes to purchase a property primarily for the purpose of opening a small artisanal bakery. During the property search, the licensee identifies a promising parcel that is currently zoned for agricultural use. The client expresses enthusiasm for the property, believing it can easily be converted for their business venture. What is the most ethical and legally compliant course of action for the licensee? Option A. Advise the client that the property is zoned agricultural and that they should look for a different property that is already zoned for commercial use, without further investigation into the current property's potential. Option B. Assure the client that agricultural zoning is often flexible and that with a little effort the property can be used for their bakery, proceeding with the purchase agreement contingent on the client obtaining the necessary permits. Option C. Proceed with the purchase agreement, highlighting the property's potential for a bakery, and inform the client that they will need to handle any zoning issues themselves after closing. Option D. Inform the client that the property is zoned for agricultural use and explain that operating a retail business like a bakery may require rezoning or a special permit, advising them to consult with the local planning board or a zoning attorney to understand the feasibility and process. The correct answer is D. Inform the client that the property is zoned for agricultural use and explain that operating a retail business like a bakery may require rezoning or a special permit, advising them to consult with the local planning board or a zoning attorney to understand the feasibility and process. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate a situation where a client's stated intent for a property purchase might not align with the property's zoning and intended use. The licensee must balance their fiduciary duty to the client with their obligation to uphold ethical standards and comply with Maine real estate laws and regulations. Misrepresenting property types or failing to disclose relevant information can lead to legal repercussions, disciplinary action from the Maine Real Estate Commission, and damage to the licensee's reputation. Careful judgment is required to ensure the client receives accurate information and that the transaction proceeds ethically and legally. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively identifying the property type based on its current zoning and intended use, and then clearly communicating this information to the client. This approach requires the licensee to conduct due diligence by verifying zoning regulations with the local municipality. If the client's intended use, e.g., operating a small retail shop, conflicts with the property's current agricultural zoning, the licensee must inform the client of this discrepancy and explain the implications, such as the need for rezoning or the impossibility of the intended use under current regulations. This upholds the licensee's duty of honesty and full disclosure, as mandated by Maine's real estate licensing laws and ethical codes, ensuring the client makes an informed decision. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the transaction based solely on the client's stated desire for a retail business, without verifying the property's zoning. This fails to meet the licensee's obligation to provide accurate information and can lead to the client purchasing a property unsuitable for their intended purpose. It violates the principle of full disclosure and could be considered a misrepresentation of the property's characteristics. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the agricultural zoning and assure the client that the property can be used for retail, hoping that the zoning issue can be resolved later. This is unethical and potentially illegal, as it involves making promises that cannot be guaranteed and misrepresenting the current legal status of the property. It bypasses the due diligence required by Maine real estate regulations. A third incorrect approach is to simply tell the client the property is zoned agricultural and leave it at that, without exploring the client's specific needs or the feasibility of changing the zoning. While factually correct, this approach lacks the proactive guidance and disclosure expected of a professional licensee. It fails to fully assist the client in understanding the implications of the zoning for their intended use and doesn't explore potential solutions or alternatives, thereby not fully fulfilling the duty of care. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes informed consent and legal compliance. This involves 1. Actively listening to and understanding the client's objectives. 2. Conducting thorough due diligence to verify all relevant property information, including zoning, permits, and any restrictions. 3. Clearly and accurately communicating all findings to the client, especially any discrepancies between their goals and the property's current status. 4. Advising the client on the implications of these findings and potential next steps, including seeking professional advice, e.g., from a zoning attorney if necessary. 5. Documenting all communications and advice provided. Question 16. Governance review demonstrates that a real estate licensee in Maine is representing a seller whose property has been on the market for 6 months with no offers. The seller is eager to sell quickly due to a personal financial need and believes their property is worth significantly more than recent comparable sales suggest. The licensee has observed a clear market trend of increasing inventory and decreasing buyer demand in the area over the past 3 months. What is the most ethically and professionally responsible course of action for the licensee? Option A. Suggest the seller take the property off the market and wait for an indeterminate period until market conditions are more favorable, without offering any analysis of potential future trends. Option B. Proactively educate the seller on the current real estate market cycle in Maine, present a realistic market analysis based on current comparable sales, and discuss strategies for pricing and marketing the property effectively in the present environment. Option C. Assure the seller that the market will rebound soon and that their property will sell at their desired price if they just wait a little longer, without providing specific data to support this prediction. Option D. Advise the seller to immediately lower the asking price by 20% to attract buyers, without first explaining the market data that supports this drastic reduction. The correct answer is B. Proactively educate the seller on the current real estate market cycle in Maine, present a realistic market analysis based on current comparable sales, and discuss strategies for pricing and marketing the property effectively in the present environment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee in Maine to navigate a situation where market trends might conflict with a client's immediate financial needs and understanding of property value. The licensee must balance their fiduciary duty to the client with the ethical obligation to provide accurate and unbiased market information, even when that information might be unwelcome or lead to a less favorable outcome for the client in the short term. Careful judgment is required to ensure the client makes an informed decision based on current market realities, not just their personal desires or outdated perceptions. The best professional approach involves proactively educating the client about the current real estate cycle in Maine, specifically highlighting the prevailing market conditions that indicate a downturn or stagnation. This includes explaining how factors like increased inventory, slower sales, and potential price adjustments are impacting property values. The licensee should then present a realistic market analysis, supported by comparable sales data. Help the client understand the likely sale price and time frame. This approach aligns with the Maine real estate license laws and commission rules, which mandate that licensees act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interest of their clients, providing them with accurate information and advice. It upholds the fiduciary duty to disclose all material facts and to represent the client diligently, an approach that involves downplaying the current market downturn and assuring the client that their property will sell quickly at their desired price without providing a realistic market analysis is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a failure to disclose material facts and misrepresentation, violating the licensee's duty of honesty and integrity. It also breaches the fiduciary duty by not acting in the client's best interest, as it could lead to the client setting an unrealistic price, resulting in prolonged market exposure, potential price reductions, and ultimately a less favorable sale. Another unacceptable approach is to immediately advise the client to list their property at a significantly lower price than they expect, without first thoroughly explaining the market conditions and allowing the client to understand the rationale. While aiming for a quick sale might be a client's goal, unilaterally pushing for a drastic price reduction without proper client consultation and education can erode trust and may not be in the client's best long-term interest if the market shows signs of stabilizing, or if there are other strategies to consider. This bypasses the client's right to make informed decisions based on a comprehensive understanding of the market. Finally, suggesting the client wait indefinitely for the market to improve without providing any concrete market data or alternative strategies is also professionally deficient. While patience can sometimes be a virtue in real estate, a licensee has a duty to provide actionable advice based on current conditions. Simply telling a client to wait, without offering any analysis or potential solutions, fails to meet the standard of diligent representation and informed guidance expected of a licensed professional in Maine. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve 1. Actively listening to and understanding the client's goals and expectations. 2. Conducting thorough market research specific to the property's location and type within Maine. 3. Analyzing current real estate trends, including inventory levels, absorption rates, and recent sales data. 4. Communicating findings clearly and transparently to the client, using data to support explanations. 5. Collaboratively developing a strategy that aligns the client's goals with market realities, ensuring the client is empowered to make informed decisions. Question 17. Benchmark analysis indicates that a real estate salesperson licensed in Maine, affiliated with a brokerage firm, has a potential buyer interested in a property listed by another brokerage. The salesperson's firm does not have an exclusive listing agreement with the seller of this property. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the salesperson to take? Option A. Contact the listing broker directly to arrange a showing for the buyer without informing their own supervising broker. Option B. Proceed to show the property to the buyer, assuming no conflict exists since their firm is not the listing agent. Option C. Immediately inform their supervising broker of the situation and await further guidance on how to proceed. Option D. Attempt to represent both the buyer and the seller in the transaction, believing they can facilitate a smooth deal. The correct answer is C. Immediately inform their supervising broker of the situation and await further guidance on how to proceed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate salesperson in Maine to navigate a situation where a potential client is expressing interest in a property that the salesperson's firm does not exclusively represent. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the salesperson's fiduciary duties and ethical obligations, particularly concerning disclosure and avoiding conflicts of interest, all within the framework of Maine's real estate licensing laws and regulations. Missteps can lead to violations of license law, ethical breaches, and potential legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves the salesperson immediately informing their supervising broker about the situation. The broker, with their broader experience and understanding of the firm's agency agreements and Maine's real estate laws, can then guide the salesperson on the appropriate next steps. This typically includes clarifying the firm's agency status with the seller of the property, if the firm has any involvement, and determining how to ethically and legally proceed with the potential buyer. This approach ensures that all actions are taken with the knowledge and approval of the supervising broker, adhering to the principle of supervision mandated by Maine's real estate licensing laws, and upholding the salesperson's duty of loyalty and disclosure to their client and firm. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding to show the property to the buyer without consulting the supervising broker and without clarifying the firm's agency relationship with the seller is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This bypasses the required supervision and could lead to undisclosed dual agency or a conflict of interest if the salesperson's firm has any prior or current relationship with the seller, even if not exclusive. It also fails to properly inform the buyer of the salesperson's agency status and the firm's potential agency relationships. Attempting to represent both the buyer and the seller in this transaction without full disclosure and informed consent from both parties, and without the explicit guidance and approval of the supervising broker, would likely violate Maine's agency disclosure laws and ethical standards. Such an action could create an undisclosed dual agency situation, which is prohibited or heavily regulated. Directly contacting the listing broker to arrange a showing without informing their own supervising broker first is also problematic. While cooperating with other brokers is standard practice, the salesperson's primary duty of supervision and adherence to their firm's policies and Maine's licensing laws means they must operate under their broker's direction, especially when potential conflicts or complex agency situations arise. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to supervisory structures, and compliance with regulatory requirements. The first step is always to identify the core issue, a potential client interaction that may involve agency complexities. Next, consult the established supervisory hierarchy within the brokerage firm. This ensures that actions are sanctioned and guided by experienced individuals who are accountable for the firm's compliance. Simultaneously, recall and apply relevant Maine Real Estate Commission regulations concerning agency disclosure, fiduciary duties, and prohibited practices. If there is any ambiguity, err on the side of caution and seek clarification from the supervising broker or, if necessary, the Maine Real Estate Commission. Question 18. Benchmark analysis indicates that a real estate agent in Portland, Maine, representing a seller, learns that a prospective buyer is very interested in the property and is willing to pay the asking price. The agent also knows this buyer personally and believes they could represent the buyer as well. What is the most appropriate course of action for the agent to take to uphold their professional responsibilities under Maine law? Option A. Immediately disclose to both the seller and the prospective buyer that the agent intends to represent both parties in this transaction and obtain their informed consent before proceeding. Option B. Proceed with the transaction, informing the seller that the buyer is interested and willing to pay the asking price, but not mentioning the agent's personal relationship with the buyer or the intention to represent them. Option C. Inform the seller of the buyer's interest and willingness to pay the asking price, and then contact the buyer to discuss their interest without mentioning the seller's knowledge of their willingness to pay full price. Option D. Inform the seller that the buyer is interested and willing to pay the asking price, and suggest the buyer make an offer slightly below asking price to account for the agent's potential dual representation. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose to both the seller and the prospective buyer that the agent intends to represent both parties in this transaction and obtain their informed consent before proceeding. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the agent to navigate a potential conflict of interest and maintain fiduciary duties while also seeking to secure a transaction. The agent must balance their obligation to their client with the opportunity to earn a commission, ensuring that their actions are transparent and do not compromise the integrity of the representation. Careful judgment is required to uphold the principles of agency law in Maine. The best professional approach involves the agent immediately disclosing their dual agency interest to both parties. This approach is correct because Maine law, specifically Title 32, Chapter 137 of the Maine Revised Statutes Annotated, MRSA, mandates that real estate licensees disclose any potential conflicts of interest. By informing both the seller and the prospective buyer that they represent both parties, the agent initiates a process of informed consent. This transparency allows both parties to understand the agent's role and decide if they are comfortable proceeding with the transaction under these circumstances. This aligns with the ethical obligations of a real estate agent to act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interests of their clients, even when those interests might diverge. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the transaction without informing the seller of the buyer's interest and the agent's potential dual representation. This failure constitutes a breach of the agent's fiduciary duty to the seller, specifically the duty of loyalty and full disclosure. Maine law requires agents to act in the best interests of their clients and to disclose all material facts that could affect a client's decision. Concealing the buyer's interest and the agent's dual role violates these fundamental principles. Another incorrect approach would be to inform only the seller about the buyer's interest, but not explicitly state the agent's intention to represent both parties. This is insufficient because it does not fully disclose the conflict of interest. The seller needs to understand that the agent is not solely advocating for their interests, but is also acting on behalf of the buyer, creating a situation where the agent must be impartial. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to advise the buyer to make a lower offer to compensate for the agent's reduced commission due to dual agency. This is unethical and potentially illegal. Agents are prohibited from advising clients in a manner that benefits themselves at the expense of their clients. The agent's compensation should not influence their advice regarding the property's value or the offer price. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency and adherence to legal and ethical standards. When a potential conflict of interest arises, the first step should always be to identify the conflict and then immediately disclose it to all affected parties. This disclosure must be clear, comprehensive, and in writing, allowing parties to make informed decisions about proceeding. If both parties consent to dual agency, the agent must then act impartially, ensuring that neither party is disadvantaged. If consent is not obtained, the agent must withdraw from representing one or both parties. Question 19. Quality control measures reveal that a real estate salesperson in Maine is assisting a client who is struggling to secure traditional mortgage financing for a property purchase. The salesperson is aware of two potential avenues: obtaining a hard money loan from a private lender or negotiating seller financing directly with the property owner. The salesperson has a strong existing relationship with a hard money lending company and believes seller financing might be more complex to arrange. What is the most professional and legally compliant approach for the salesperson to take in this situation? Option A. Advise the client to pursue seller financing, emphasizing that it will likely be less complicated and lead to a quicker transaction, without delving into the specific repayment terms or potential risks. Option B. Strongly advocate for the hard money loan option, highlighting its potential for faster closing times and leveraging their existing relationship with the lending company to expedite the process. Option C. Fully educate the client on the characteristics, risks, and benefits of both hard money loans and seller financing, facilitating a discussion for the client to make an informed choice based on their financial situation and risk tolerance. Option D. Focus on the potential for a higher commission with hard money loans and explain this benefit to the client, while briefly mentioning seller financing as a less lucrative alternative. The correct answer is C. Fully educate the client on the characteristics, risks, and benefits of both hard money loans and seller financing, facilitating a discussion for the client to make an informed choice based on their financial situation and risk tolerance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a salesperson to navigate complex financing options for a client while adhering to Maine's real estate licensing laws and ethical obligations. The salesperson must understand the nuances of hard money loans and seller financing, recognizing their distinct risks and benefits, and ensure the client's best interests are prioritized, avoiding any misrepresentation or undue influence. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly educating the client about both hard money loans and seller financing, detailing the typical terms, risks, and benefits of each, and then facilitating a discussion where the client can make an informed decision based on their financial situation and risk tolerance. This approach aligns with Maine's statutory requirements for licensees to act with honesty, integrity, and competence, and to disclose all material facts. Specifically, Maine law emphasizes the licensee's duty to represent the client's best interests and to provide information that enables informed decision-making, without steering the client towards a particular financing method for personal gain. Incorrect approach is analysis. Presenting hard money loans as the only viable option without fully exploring seller financing, especially if the salesperson has a prior relationship or referral agreement with a hard money lender, constitutes a potential conflict of interest and violates the duty of full disclosure and fair dealing. This could be seen as steering the client and prioritizing personal benefit over the client's needs, which is contrary to ethical real estate practice and Maine's licensing regulations. Recommending seller financing solely because it might lead to a quicker closing, without a comprehensive assessment of the client's ability to manage the repayment terms or the potential risks associated with a non-traditional loan, is also professionally unsound. This overlooks the fiduciary duty to ensure the client understands and can handle the financial obligations, potentially exposing them to significant risk and violating the principle of competent representation. Focusing exclusively on the potential for higher commission with hard money loans, while downplaying the associated risks to the client, is a clear ethical breach. This prioritizes the salesperson's financial gain over the client's well-being and is a direct violation of the duty to act with integrity and avoid misrepresentation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach financing discussions by first understanding the client's financial capacity, goals, and risk appetite. They should then present a balanced overview of all relevant financing options, including their pros and cons, in a clear and understandable manner. This educational approach empowers the client to make informed decisions. If a salesperson has any potential conflicts of interest related to specific lenders or financing types, these must be fully disclosed to the client. The ultimate goal is to facilitate a transaction that is in the client's best interest, supported by transparent communication and adherence to all legal and ethical standards. Question 20. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a client in Maine is interested in investing in a real estate investment trust rate for income generation. The client has $50,000 to invest and has been informed that the rate currently has a dividend yield of 4.5%. The client is asking for an estimate of the annual income they could expect from this investment. What is the most appropriate response for the Maine licensed real estate salesperson to provide? Option A. Calculate the projected annual income based on the current dividend yield and the investment amount, and then clearly explain the potential risks associated with rate investments. Option B. State that the rate is a strong income-generating investment without providing specific figures or risk disclosures. Option C. Focus solely on the potential for capital appreciation of the rate, as this is where the real profits lie. Option D. Provide the projected annual income figure without mentioning any potential risks, as the client is primarily focused on income. The correct answer is A. Calculate the projected annual income based on the current dividend yield and the investment amount, and then clearly explain the potential risks associated with rate investments. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a salesperson to not only understand the financial implications of a real estate investment trust rate investment, but also to accurately communicate the associated risks and potential returns to a client, adhering to Maine's specific real estate licensing laws and ethical standards. Misrepresenting potential returns or failing to adequately disclose risks can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions, including license suspension or revocation. The salesperson must balance the client's desire for income with the inherent volatility of rate. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves calculating the projected annual income based on the current dividend yield and the total investment amount, and then clearly communicating this projected income alongside a comprehensive disclosure of the risks associated with rate investments, as mandated by Maine's real estate regulations. This approach ensures transparency and compliance by providing the client with a realistic expectation of potential income, while also fulfilling the duty to inform about potential downsides. The calculation for projected annual income is // text projected annual income equals / text investment amount / times / text dividend yield / in this case / text projected annual income equals $50,000 times 0.45 equals $250. This approach directly addresses the client's interest in income generation, while adhering to the ethical obligation to disclose all material information, including risks. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply state that the rate is a good income-generating investment without providing specific figures or risk disclosures. This fails to meet the standard of care required by Maine real estate law, which mandates full and fair disclosure of all material facts. It misleads the client by implying a guaranteed or overly optimistic outcome without substantiation. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the potential for capital appreciation and ignore the dividend yield and income aspect the client is seeking. While capital appreciation is a potential benefit of rate, it is not guaranteed and does not address the client's stated objective. This approach misrepresents the primary benefit the client is looking for and fails to provide a complete picture of the investment's characteristics. A third incorrect approach is to provide a projected income figure without any accompanying discussion of the risks involved, such as interest rate sensitivity, market fluctuations, or the specific risks of the underlying real estate assets. This is a direct violation of the duty to disclose material risks, as required by Maine's real estate licensing laws and ethical guidelines for licensees. It creates an incomplete and potentially misleading impression of the investment's safety and reliability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize transparency and full disclosure. When dealing with investment vehicles like REIT, it is crucial to 1. Understand the client's financial goals and risk tolerance. 2. Accurately calculate and present potential returns based on current data, using appropriate formulas. 3. Clearly articulate all associated risks, referencing any relevant disclosures or prospectuses. 4. Ensure all communications are truthful, not misleading, and comply with all applicable Maine real estate regulations. This systematic approach protects both the client and the licensee.